So to give you guys a little bit more explanation about your speaker, which many of you do know about, yes, he was a medical doctor, and although he is currently run as a Republican congressman and originally ran as a Republican congressman, he ran as a Libertarian presidential candidate. He quit the Libertarian Party to make a statement about the loss of our liberties that's happening and how these major parties are not doing justice to protect and defend the interests of the American and defend the Constitution of the United States. But he is a freedom lover and the constitutionalist to the core, and in my opinion, the number one person in Congress that believes in the Constitution and a limited government as it calls for. And he not only represents his constituents in Texas that vote for him, but I believe this man knows that in his heart and in his mind, he really represents the soul of the modern freedom movement in the halls of Congress as the man who does not compromise freedom and does not compromise the Constitution and votes the right way every time as a beacon of light stands there for liberty and justice for all that we're all seeking. Please help me give a warm hand of welcome to your banquet speaker tonight, Dr. Congressman Ron Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know I'm here from the government, and I'm here to help you tonight. It was mentioned that I ran as a Libertarian in 1988, and that comes up frequently, even in Washington. And I'll be introduced, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, he ran for president." And then people come and they'll say, "Oh yeah, you were a candidate. How well did you do in 1988?" And the percentages, nothing to brag about, and the total numbers, nothing to brag about. So I tell them, I said, I can't remember. I can't remember exactly that number, and I can't remember that percentage, but I remember I came in third. Third's not too bad. And running track, we used to get a medal at third place, But it also means that you don't have much clout either. But it is nice to be here. It's nice to see so many old friends and new friends, and I appreciate all of those of you who have helped in the past, because I have quite a few projects, whether it's educational or political or whatever. I know a lot of you have sent money, and the truth is an individual like myself can't do much without support like that. It's interesting, if you're in Washington and you have absolutely no contest because you're in a solidly Democratic seat or a solidly Republican seat, these guys end up with a lot of money in the bank. And you wonder why, and it's very simple. The political action committees never stop buying influence, and more so when you're solid in your seat. If you become solid, they figure, well, we still have to buy our influence. So they end up with millions of dollars in their campaign funds. And a person like myself really can't go continuously to individuals, because my average donation is $38. And sometimes we have tough races, and sometimes we don't have tough races. But lo and behold, I don't get any money from the political action committees. They consider it a bad investment, so they just don't send anything. So it's something that requires attention. Now, one of my goals in politics over the years has been to confront the problem that we face so often. Have you ever run into a candidate? He sounded pretty good, and you helped him out, and he went to Washington, and he seemed to forget you and forget about the way he would vote. And that was one of my motivations. I just thought, why can't they go and just do what they say and see what happens? So my goal was to put it on the table, tell people where I stood and what I believed in, and go and do it. And then actually get elected on those terms, but then get reelected on those terms, and then try to improve the percentages each time. And that's been my goal, and so far we've been successful. Our percentages have gone up. And, Texas had redistricting twice, and the second go-around meant the districts were changed once again. This last go-around, the district I have had over 300,000 new voters, and it was considered the weakest of all the Republican districts, so there was nothing automatic about it. But the interesting thing about it was they were going to not try to put me out. They still wanted a Republican seat, for voting for speaker and a few things like that. But the interesting thing happened that with all that redistricting, I was the only one in Texas that didn't have an opponent. Which I find pretty neat, because I'd like to believe that the real reason for that is that the ideas of liberty are popular across the board, Republican or Democrat, and that these views can be portrayed as being very popular, and you can get general support across the board. So the biggest complaint I get are from Republicans. The Republican leadership, county chairmen, the people who are closest to Bush. And in my circumstance, it's a little more difficult, because as a civil libertarian and one who's positively opposed to this preemptive war, tends to put you in the category of being more liberal. But to do that in a Bible Belt, very conservative district, which is next door to where President Bush lives, it gives me a bit of a challenge, But so far, we've been able to present the case for liberty, and I meet very frequently with veterans, and still give the same story about what I believe in and how careful we ought to be about going to war. And although too often when I see the veteran groups met by some of our people in our administration, it's all rah, let's march off and go to war. Veterans will be very open to the argument that we should be more careful. One of my explanations or points I make with the veterans and with all Americans is that, isn't it ironic that we're told that we have to march 6,000 or 7,000 miles away and get involved in a preemptive war, and we do that to save freedom and liberty and the Constitution by refusing to declare the war like our Constitution tells us to. That's pretty bad. Sometimes you can tell an individual by what kind of legislation they introduce. And the one characteristic, and I have a reputation for this, is I do introduce legislation. Most of the time it's to make a point, and a very important point. And the most characteristic of my legislation is when I introduce it, and if you look at it, it's usually only about 1 or 2 pages at total length. It's not going to ever be very complex, because it really doesn't take a whole lot to repeal. That's pretty easy. Repeal this, repeal that. For instance, this year so far, I've introduced legislation, to get rid of the Federal Reserve. A minor little problem there. And another one that would deal with repealing the 16th Amendment and getting rid of the IRS, the Liberty Amendment. So there's one other dealing with foreign policy that has been a favorite with people who care about national sovereignty and liberty, and that is 1146, which is get out of the UN. My first venture into politics was in 1974. It came out of the problems that we were facing in the 80s. I had been introduced to Austrian free market economics. I got fascinated with the monetary issue. And I can remember very distinctly 1971, August 15th, when the Bretton Woods Agreement broke down and the gold window was closed and wage and price controls were put on and tariffs were put on imports. And it was just a very, very big event because it had taken from 1913 to 1971 to completely undermine the integrity of our currency. And in 1974, I decided I would run for Congress for the sole purpose of just having a forum and getting to talk about something that I thought was important, with really no belief that much would come of it because I didn't expect anybody to listen or anybody to care. And so I went, and I had this very, very big medical practice. I was the only OB-GYN doctor in the entire county. So I went to my wife and I told her what I was planning on doing, and she said, what in the world would you want to do that for? And I said, well, and I explained to her, I wanted to talk about this monetary policy and the course that we're going in, and the big government's development. And she said, yeah, but she says this could be real dangerous, running for Congress. And I didn't know she was into the conspiracy thing. So I said, what do you mean it could be dangerous? She said, well, you could end up getting elected. But I guaranteed her that wouldn't happen. And 1974 it didn't happen, but I did get elected in 76, and I served for 4 terms in the late 70s and the early 80s. Then decided that the last thing I wanted was to spend so much time in the rest of my life in Congress. Of course, those individuals that went into Congress with me in the 70s are the ones who really run the Congress right now. They're the committee chairmen, which I don't envy one bit. But I decided to go back home. I went home for 12 years and practiced medicine and stayed active, but then decided to run again in 1996 and was reelected that year. So I've been back now for 4 terms and into the 5th term. A lot of people ask me, well, what's the difference between what it was like in the 70s and 80s versus what it's like in Washington today? And there's really not a whole lot of difference. If anything, it's just slightly worse. It's gradually getting worse. Government is bigger. It's more intrusive. It's the taxes are higher, and spending is worse. The deficit's worse. The finances. I was concerned about the finances in the 70s, but our basic financial condition of this country is much worse than it was in the 70s. So I would say that conditions are every bit as bad or worse than back then, and yet I am still pretty optimistic about what's happening, but not with what happens on a daily basis in Washington. I mean, if I had to depend on what's happening in Washington, that wouldn't be very, very encouraging. A lot of people ask me, well, isn't it pretty, don't you get pretty discouraged? Don't you get really frustrated with what's going on up there? I said, never. I never get frustrated with what's happening in Washington. I just have real low expectations for what's going to happen in Washington. And that's the only way I could exist, because my goals and my efforts aren't directed toward Washington itself. It's not that I neglect it, and I have a group that I try to help along in the freedom movement and introduce them to ideas. But where we should be optimistic is what's happening outside of Washington. And that's the only thing that really counts, because Washington doesn't run the country. Washington is a mere reflection of what the people want and understand and believe in. So if the leadership of the country and the media and the educational system causes the masses of people in this country to endorse a certain system of government, that's the kind of government we're going to have. So even dictatorships have to get a certain amount of consensus from the people. And when the people really get sick of it, it is uprooted. And this was essentially what happened with the Soviet system. The people finally got tired of it. And also the system was flawed. Socialism doesn't work, so that system collapsed. But still, the prevailing wisdom, the knowledge and desires of the people still endorse the government. But where we should be optimistic is that there's a large number of people, a growing number of people, who are now starting to think our way and starting to talk about, how long is this going to last and what's going to happen? What are the ramifications? I think the debate is great on Social Security because it brings to our attention, the flaw of the system. A lot of people ask me, well, what should we do about it? How can you save Social Security? I said, well, you can't save a Ponzi scheme that's totally bankrupt. There's no way. I mean, there are things that you could do in transition, but if you start off by claiming that we're going to save this insurance scheme, it's not going to work. We all know that if an insurance company had been run like the Social Security system, they'd all be put in jail for fraud. And yet it is a serious problem because a lot of people in this country have become dependent, on Social Security. And just to dump them all out in the street wouldn't be a very good idea. And although something has to be done, the likelihood of Washington doing the right thing isn't very good. They aren't very good. So we have to anticipate that this will contribute to the collapse of the dollar, as will our foreign policy, and something will have to be done. But if we as a people decided that we wanted a different system and that Congress would respond, it wouldn't be that difficult. There could be a transition developed. Very simply, what we could do is save these hundreds of billions of dollars. It's up to $420 billion now, not in defending this country, but used for provoking problems around the world. We have just spent $300 billion in the last 2 years on Afghanistan and Iraq, making us safe and secure. Just happens, I think, we're less safe and secure than we were before that. But can you imagine how those kind of funds could be used for any type of transition if we wanted to let young people get out of Social Security, how we could take care of those individuals who have become dependent and use those funds. But instead, one of the proposals in the President's budget is to increase the fees that the veterans pay when they buy their medications, and maybe that will help balance the budget. That to me is just criminal. And, there's another area that the federal government's been involved in over the years, and even though in a libertarian society you wouldn't have to have this, but they have been involved for many, many years, and that's dealing with our infrastructure, our rivers and our ports and waterways. That's being cut. It's easier now to go get a bridge built in Iraq or Afghanistan than it would be in somebody's congressional district because they're cutting those funds and they're in desperate needs. That to me is just a sign of priorities. As bad as the system is and the finances are, it would not be impossible to systematically cut back in certain areas and build transition. The odds of that happening, though, aren't very good because there's not a consensus in the country, nor is there a consensus in Congress to take care of it. Most people believe that if they need something, government will provide for it. They don't ask where does it come from. And they have come to the point of believing that rights means entitlements. If they want something, they are entitled to it, and that's a right. And as long as that is a prevailing attitude, we're in big trouble. And the American people have not yet really challenged this notion about whether or not we should be the policemen of the world. I happen to think that is a shifting attitude and that we can still win that argument. But overall, we'll win the argument about what's happening overseas and domestically because we're going to run out of money. And when we run out of money, we can't afford it. So whether or not we can talk them into believing our way is not as relevant as what are we going to do when we have a financial crisis? And the way I see this crisis coming about will be as a destruction of the dollar. A tremendous exaggeration of what happened in the 1970s, stagflation, depression, or serious recession with rising prices. And I think we're starting to see that right now. There's if you look at government statistics, the government's always telling us there's no inflation. And I argue a little bit with that chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, I think his name is Greenspan, on a few occasions about that. For instance, when they measure the CPI, they don't measure the cost of houses. They measure the cost of rent. And of course, when they make this generous credit and liquidity available to everybody buys a house, prices of houses are skyrocketing and rents go down. So they use rent as a measurement of living inflation. So everything is skewed in the wrong direction. We have tremendous inflation when it comes to medical costs, when it comes to the cost of government and whatnot. The value of the dollar is going down, and it is a direct result of the fact that we print too much money. And there's a motivation for printing this too much money, and this is something that I was challenging the Chairman Greenspan not too many days ago, a couple weeks ago, and that is he was complaining about deficit spending. He was chastising the Congress. Why are you spending so much money, and why are you running up these deficits? You guys shouldn't be doing this. But my charge to him was that he was a part of the problem. He was the accomplice. I said that to the chairman, you're the one that monetizes the debt. We run up the deficit, and we borrow some, we tax some, but we have a lot left over, and we don't know what to do with it. We send it over there, and you buy the treasury bills, and you buy it with credit out of thin air. I said that with that kind of a system, the Congress will always abuse it. I mean, it's been known, it's been that way throughout history. And yet he was not quite ready to concede that point, even though I took out his article that he wrote in 1967 for Ayn Rand's newsletter, Gold and Freedom, and read to him and asked him, well, what about this statement? And it's a great statement, and it specifically made the point that Congress spends too much money and the Federal Reserve creates too much credit. And he said that, well, that was 40 years ago, and he was wrong back then, and he had changed his opinion. But how do we know? Maybe he's wrong now. Maybe he was right 40 years ago, which is what I believe is the case. So he will be leaving the Federal Reserve pretty soon, but it's the system. He is not the entire problem, no matter how we look at it. It's the system. It's the system that has defied and has abused the use of abused the Constitution by not following the Constitution. There is no authority in the Constitution for a central bank. There's only authority for gold and silver to be legal tender, and nothing else should be legal tender. So there is no authority for central bank. But the Constitution, that is where the real crisis is that there is no respect for the rule of law. And there's no respect by the Congress, there's no respect by the executive branch, and there's no respect by the judicial branch. And it's commonplace, and there's no desire to do much about it. A lot of members of Congress have been educated in a public school system which teaches that a rigid interpretation of the Constitution is not good because you want to be flexible and you have to adapt the Constitution to modern times. So therefore, it has to be a living, breathing document. And therefore, what they're saying is they believe the Constitution shouldn't have any meaning and politicians can do anything they want. So, when the issue of the war came up, I'm on the banking committee, which I've been on the whole time I've ever been in Congress. But in recent years, I was anxious to get on international relations, believing that foreign policy is probably one of the biggest issues contributing to the loss of liberty, because it's in times of war that people get frightened and scared and are so willing to sacrifice liberties and to be safe and secure. And certainly with what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan and the new war on terrorism, which is another excuse to abuse our liberties, being on the international relations, I was there when they brought the resolution to the committee to decide whether or not to give authority to go to war. And the resolution was typical. It had nothing to do with assuming responsibility. It essentially said that the Congress is giving the President authority to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. They were transferring the responsibility and the power of Congress to the President. And remember, after that was passed for several months, the President said, I have not decided yet to go to war. I have not yet decided. It just aggravated me to no ends because it was, I did this, or I'll do this, I'll do that. And at the same time, it was the Congress who was negligent in giving this responsibility to the President. In that resolution, the UN was cited 21 times. Now, every once in a while you'll hear the President and Rumsfeld say something nasty about the United Nations, and people say, yeah, they're against the United Nations. They're really not. All they want is the United Nations to make sure they rubber stamp all the stuff they're doing. And that's why, in many ways, the resolution was saying, look, if the UN won't enforce these resolutions, we will. We'll save the United Nations by us, sort of overstepping our bounds and not waiting for the full permission from the United Nations. But the fact that we have gone to war since World War II on quite a few occasions by never declaring war and then never winning them and never knowing what's happening, and the war's always being politicized and never ending, and we end up losing a lot of men and many women, I thought, well, the main problem is we don't follow the rules. We ignore the rules. So I brought up the substitute resolution, which was sort of a copy from what was done at World War II. It's only one sentence or two. It's a declaration of war. So when I offered it in the committee, I told them, I said, you're going to have to defeat this because I'm going to vote against this. But if you want a war, you ought to have at least the responsibility to vote for it and say that's what you're doing. And, of course, they didn't like that at all. They were very, very annoyed that I would do such a thing. One individual said that was nothing but frivolous legislating for me to even suggest that we should look at the Constitution. And then our Chairman Henry Hyde, was very provoked by it all, and he was ranting a bit on it. He said that part of the Constitution was an anachronism. We didn't have to follow it. So here it is. One of the most important functions that a government can do is declare war and send young people off to war. And one of the reasons why the Constitution or the Revolution was fought and fully debated and written into the Constitution, that it was not the responsibility of the executive branch to go to war. It was to always be the body closest to the people, was to be the Congress. And that's how glib they are. And of course, not one individual voted. I made them, they voice voted it. And then they got really annoyed again when I said we're going to have a recorded vote. So I put them through the procedure of everybody, voting no. At the same time, they were all voting for war, but they wanted the president to do it and let him have all the responsibility of it, and he was glad to assume that responsibility. And that is not brand new. It's been that whole system's been around. It's not only this administration; it's been both administrations, both parties, and it's been there for 50 years or so now. So there's very little respect for the Constitution. There's very little respect for the founders' admonition of staying out of entangling alliances and minding our own business, being friends in trade with the nations of the world. At the same time, not going about the world and looking for monsters to destroy, as John Quincy Adams warned us against. And yet that is what we're doing, and it's contributing to the loss of liberty and the bankruptcy of this country. And someday, when we prevail, we'll make sure that attitude is changed. I have a plaque in my office by Grover Cleveland, and there's a little quote under his picture, and it says that if you're elected or reelected, and you don't stand for something, it's not worth anything. And it's a good quote, and of course it fits my belief strongly that what good is being elected or reelected if you don't stand for anything? And yet that so often is the motivation of so many members. Is being there is very, very important. The parties don't have much difference in beliefs, but there is serious competition because it is a real struggle on who holds the power and the largesse. But the philosophies are essentially the same: monetary policy and foreign policy, domestic policy. These are essentially the same. And somebody else told, and I think that. If you don't stand for something, I think the admonition is that you'll fall for anything. And I think that is the case. But, I was talking to one of our leaders, Republican leaders, in a private way, and this subject came up, and he said, yes, but if you stand for something, you don't go anywhere. So his attitude was standing was like physically standing still. But that is true in politics. If you stand for something and you defy the conventional wisdom and you don't play ball and you don't trade your votes and you don't play those games, you don't go anywhere under their terms. So don't expect me to be a committee chairman. It won't happen. But hopefully what I contribute is something somewhat different, and it will have as much or more value. But that is, the system works the other way. That's why those good members that go that you know about, you'll know in 1 week. When the new members come in, I can tell in 1 week what will happen. Because they will immediately have to decide whether they would vote with me, sometimes by myself, or whether they're going to do what the leadership tells them. When there's a tough vote, and one of the toughest votes, controversial votes, was the prescription drug bill. Anybody remember that? It was the one that started at 3 in the morning, and we went till 6:30 in the morning, and they were short about 9 or 10 votes, and the drug companies really wanted this, and the Republicans didn't have it, but they were going to stay there for a week if they had to twist arms and get people to change their vote, which they eventually got enough votes to change. But they have a system. A good friend comes and talks to you, and then somebody from the committee comes and talks to you, then somebody from the leadership comes to you, and then, if you still haven't caved in, then the speaker comes and talks to you. And the speaker looks at you in the face and said, they haven't done this to me, but I've watched them do it to other people. They leave me alone. But he'll look them in the face. He says, are you going to be a team player or not? And if the answer is, no, I'm sticking with my no vote, you're not a team player and you're in big trouble in the conventional wisdom of Washington. That means your committee positions aren't secure. Your money going to your district is not secure. Your promotion's out there. You're not going to be a subcommittee or a committee chairman ever, and you'll be blackballed. So just think of what happened when the committee chairman on ethics committee, reprimanded delayed on 3 occasions. Because there were some infractions on ethics. He was reprimanded. It was nothing. He wasn't being censored or anything else. Well, he didn't get his job back. He's gone. Then there was this chairman, Chris Smith, who I like because he was championing one of the very few programs I can support, and that's for the veterans. So Chris Smith is out there championing and saying, you're shortchanging the veterans. Well, he lost his job too. So it's a system that is pretty ruthless. So the young guys that go there, they're going and they're planning to stay. And all of a sudden, that system up there has tremendous influence and impact on them because you see all these important people who run the country. The president will call you. And say, what are you going to do? And vote for this, And that's very impressive. All of a sudden, you back home become less significant. The only answer to that is that you back home, if you care and if you have the influence and the votes are there, you have to get together and you have to do something about it because eventually that's the only option short of violence. And I'm arguing the case that we should work through the system until we have no other options. But This system can work, and that, of course, has been part of my goal, is to prove that to the best of my ability that if I do this job and I work hard in my district, I don't want to be elected in my district by them thinking that I support something else. I want them to know what I believe in. I don't want them to think that I support the president on the war. I go home and tell them I don't support the president on the war. And then if I can get elected, it means something, and hopefully this will encourage others. We do have the Liberty Committee, and there are 23 members of that, and it's a group that I've formed. Probably about 12 of them are pretty sincere, but we still wouldn't vote, as a block. So there are individuals who are sincere, and they would like to do better, but too often they'll say, well, I agree with you on this one, but I don't think I can explain it back home. So that's part of the problem as well, that they're not comfortable and confident enough to go home and explain these positions. But I feel very confident. I am very confident that freedom works, and I'm very confident that this country was on the right track, and the Constitution, though flawed, was the greatest document, and it's not working well today because we neglect it. And we're not unlike so many other countries and republics in history. But the question is whether we as a group and people who agree with us can have an effect. What will happen? And we don't know. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know. The Soviet system was a rather wonderful surprise that it collapsed. But it was predictable. Von Mises predicted that a socialist system would collapse because it can't work. But he also predicted that our system, which is leaning toward more fascism than it is socialism, can't work either. So the question is who's going to pick up the pieces? Who's going to have the influence? And this is where we should be encouraged. As bad as the educational system is getting, and it can't get much worse, the more homeschoolers there are, and the more private schooling there is. And that's a great thing. In the 1970s, when I was there the first time, there was no internet. There's an internet now, and there's a lot of good information out there. A lot of messy information, too, but there's a lot of good information out there, and I think that is very, very helpful. So we have a lot of things going our way, and our numbers are growing. It's just that we still have a long way to go. And that there's no reason not to be optimistic, but I think we also have to be realistic. I think this idea that I'm not frustrated should apply to all that we do. Because if you think tomorrow you're going to have a major victory in some court, and all of a sudden this country is going to be turned around, it's not going to happen. Does that mean we shouldn't do it? No, we should do it. We should do everything possible to make the point. And I see this as much educational as making a point and letting this message spread. And a lot of people will come to me and they say, oh, yeah, this sounds good. I'd like to do what you're doing. What should I do? And what I do is what I do. And what you do is what you have to do. Everybody has a job. And it could be on the radio. It could be running for office. It could be supporting candidates. But Leonard Read, who was one of my favorite, Leonard Read started the Foundation for Economic Education. It was the only libertarian free market think tank going in the 50s. And he had a very good philosophy. He says the most important responsibility is to study, to know what is going on, to become an expert, to know what you believe in and know something about history. And then, he says, make yourself available. He says, but you cannot think that if you believe you have the right answers and you can go and grab somebody by the shirt collar and you can shake them into believing the way you do, he says, it doesn't work that way. He says that'll just turn them off and turn them away. So becoming knowledgeable and becoming available and being willing to fight the fight is the most important thing. The other thing that he taught me was that in doing so, it ought to be done with a bit of fun. Life is too short to be too solemn, because if we don't know what tomorrow may bring, we might as well have fun today. And that's why I'm sure that you get crowds like this to come and talk about this, because you're talking with friends and you meet new friends and you have very similar goals. You have a basic understanding what a free society is all about, and you're sick and tired of what our government's been doing to us. That, to me, should encourage us all. And this other side of the coin, which sometimes is a little bit annoying to me, is that the old idea of what the people do under stress, under concern about their safety and security, has been what has happened since 9/11. That is pretty sad. And one thing that really bothers me is so much of that legislation, if not all the legislation passed since 9/11, was legislation that had been all proposed before 9/11. And they just waited for the opportunity for punching that stuff on us. A couple of weeks ago, we had a bill that was passed. It was the Real ID Act. Anybody heard about the Real ID bill? Now that to me was a sad day, because that was proposed, before 9/11. They'd like to know everything about you, what you're doing, where you are, and what's going on. For tax purposes, I think, more than anything else. But the Real ID Act was passed off as something to catch terrorists and take care of illegal immigration. Came down from an administration that refused to even ask, with all that money, refused to even ask for the funding for the border guards that were authorized by the Congress. 2,000 border guards were authorized, and they asked for funding for 200. At the same time, they pounced this Real ID card on us and say this will take care of all the problems. There was one Republican that voted against it. That is yours truly. And there were quite a few Democrats. I don't know how many, 40, 30, something like that voted against it. But everybody went along with it. They were talked in and say, oh, it's not really a national ID card, and the president wants it. We don't want to embarrass him, so we have to vote for it. That is an atrocious piece of legislation. It has not passed in the Senate. It's something that, if you have any contact or you feel like being a political activist, you ought to let the senators know that that bill should not pass. It gives the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security unbelievable powers. And the amount of information that's going to go into our national regulated driver's licenses is unlimited. Which means, without even knowledge of the Congress or permission of the Congress, the Secretary of Homeland Security could put into those licenses the requirement that there be some radio frequency ID, which has already been put into our passports in the process of doing it. Which means they can read. It won't be like take out your papers and show your papers. They're going to read your papers by just walking by with the technology that they have now. So this to me is a bad sign. So we have this country going in that direction. At the same time, I see a growing number of people who are sick and tired of it all. So the contest is going to get hot and heavy, and how it transpires is another major question. But the other types of legislation, like the Patriot Act and the more proposals, all the same thing: more control, people control, and this thing is not just national. You know, some of us still believe that the states were supposed to have sovereignty, not the federal government. But we're not even dealing with just the federal government. We're talking about with international government. You know, the United Nations and this ID card, setting up this huge data bank in Washington D.C. and that data is going to be made available to the governments in Mexico and Canada. I mean, that is the move. That is the direction that we're moving in, and of course, I see that as a very serious problem. But this country will not be able to afford it financially, and we can't afford it with our loss of liberties. And we will finally have enough people who say liberty is more valuable than just so-called security. Now, those others who will say, well, that still is an overwhelming task because you say our numbers are small and we need a 51%, which is not true. We don't need 51%. Most people throughout all history are followers, and they will be persuaded to go a certain direction. The more important thing is that the 3 or 4 or 5% of the people who are in positions of influence have our beliefs. So that is the reason we should be working on young people. Young people, that's why homeschooling is so important. But that is also important why we try to talk our young people, our kids and our grandchildren and our friends and our neighbors and our people in our church to go into things like, into the media and into teaching. Because it doesn't happen overnight to be transpired. And yet those numbers will grow, and that's the only way it works. Washington will not change because I'm there. I serve a purpose and a function, and I do my job as one individual. But the only thing that will change Washington will be to change the country. We finally have to get the people in this country to believe and respect liberty. We have lost our way because we have lost our confidence. Too many people cannot believe what would it be like for medical care without the government giving us medical care. You know, it was not too many years ago. I remember what it was like when I started in medicine. I was in the military in San Antonio, Texas, and I wanted to work a little extra and get a little experience, and I went and worked at the Santa Rosa Hospital, which was a charity hospital. And I stayed up all night. I worked 12 hours and saw everybody and anybody came in, and nobody was turned away. Everybody got medical care. And I made $3 an hour. But the system worked. Today, if you go to the emergency room, yes, everybody gets channeled to the emergency rooms. The doctors won't see them. They won't take their calls. And when you go to the emergency room, the maximum charge is there, never the minimum. No charity, because everybody gets put on Medicare and Medicaid and everything else. So you looking, well, we have to get the maximum test. And then you have this legal problem that comes in. Oh, I'm scared to death. I'm going to get sued, so I better order every single test in the book. My wife got sick the other day. She had a mild kidney infection, which when I was in practice, I could have treated it for about $7.50. Did a urine analysis and looked under the microscope. I could have made the diagnosis. We took her to the hospital. She ended up with a $1,700 bill. I mean, this thing's crazy. But it's because the market's not working. We have given up our faith and confidence, belief that freedom works. And freedom does work. And that's why this group is so important, because that's what you're talking about. And coming around to believing that, but the message has to be spread. I happen to believe that all my activities and all those other activities of any one of you who are interested in politics to be directed in one way. The purpose of political activity is to promote liberty. No more complicated than that. But with the belief that with liberty that we can work to improve ourselves and work for excellence and work for virtue, deal with our spiritual life and deal with our material well-being. At the same time, endorsing a foreign policy that would have to be a lot different, so we didn't have to send kids off to war and a few other things like that. But we would have to have faith that liberty would work and that personal achievement could be achieved in that manner. Now, what we have come to accept is that government does that. Government is supposed to make us better. You know, in the economic sense, we don't want anybody to be unequal. So everybody has to be equal. In doing that, yeah, we'll all end up unequal. That's the philosophy of socialism. Everybody's equal at a very low level. So you sacrifice economic liberty if you endorse the liberal notion that you have to have economic equality. But what if you accept the principle of too many conservative meddlers in our private life? We'd like to make you a better person. We don't want you to smoke or drink or gamble or do anything that we think is morally corrupt. Yet it's only hurting you and not anybody else. Governments cannot protect you from yourself. And this whole idea that the government is always there with a camera on us, wondering whether our seatbelt is buckled and all this is the kind of thing that we have endorsed a nanny state. So you can't have a government trying to improve our personal behavior or trying to make the economy fair or trying to make the world safe for democracy without the sacrifice of liberty. So that is the choice. It's clear. It's not complicated at all. We as a people, and I enjoy talking to young people, especially because I can direct it right to them on what they're getting from us. And it's not very good. They're getting a lot of debt and a lot of problems. But the younger generation, the people coming out of college now, the people that are wondering about Social Security, they're the ones who have to decide what should the role of government be. Should the role of government be like what we're accepting today, or should it be closer to what the founders of this country thought? And that is, of course, what I argue for. You know, one of my favorites of the founding fathers was Samuel Adams, and he had some instruction here, and he says, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." And that, of course, I think is very appropriate, you know, for a group like this, because that's what we should be doing. And that was the spirit of the revolution. And we have to be careful. At one sense, we're in a way radical in that we don't like what our current system is all about. But in many ways, we represent what was good and the best of America. The best of the history of the world in many ways of what real liberty is all about. And we tasted it. And we experienced it, and we enjoyed the material welfare that came from that. And yet now we stand a chance to lose it. And we lose it, and some people think we're losing it because the government's not doing enough to protect our materialism and taking care of us. But we're losing it because we don't have enough respect for liberty and determination to strive for liberty and believing that we can take care of ourselves. This to me is the whole message of what this country is all about and our responsibility. There is no reason why we can't win. There's no reason why we can't have a lot of fun doing it, associating with other individuals who care. And there's no reason why we as an individual don't have to do what I do or somebody else does. Everybody has a job. Everybody has a role to play. And there is no reason in the world that we shouldn't be able to use the amount of freedoms that we have left to turn this around, with always the preparation that in case we don't and things get much worse in the times of an economic calamity, which I think is coming regardless. Then we have to at least have a remnant there that will hold things together and hold these views together, but always being optimistic enough to believe that if we do our job well, that we can preserve the greatness of this country. Thank you very much.